All right, well, hello and welcome to the second online meeting of the Bay Area Digital Transformation Group. Our first session was an introduction to digital process automation and robotic process automation and a discussion about how they work together. We recorded that one and we highly recommend you check it out. We'll be telling you where to find it at the end. We also have a schedule of more events throughout the year. The next one's going to be in August, and it's going to be on practical business process analysis and modeling techniques. But today, we're talking about the importance of baselining and KPI, or key performance indicators, to initiate and drive your digital transformation projects. So during the session today, there's going to be a short presentation to set the stage for our discussion topic. And then we're going to hopefully get into some good group discussion. Unfortunately, since we had to move this to the web, we're not going to have the same opportunities for networking and face-to-face discussion. But we do hope that in the near future, we're going to be able to revive the in-person sessions and get together in person again. But in the meantime, as we're going through the presentation here, please do drop discussion topics or questions into the chat of GoToWebinar so that we can pick up some of those questions and discuss them at the end. So let's go ahead and get started without further ado with some quick introductions, starting with Tim Harris from our event sponsor, Axon Ivy.
Thanks, Neil. It's a pleasure to join you on the call today, on the webinar today, and to be a sponsor of InnoVelocity webinar series. Axon Ivy is a digital process automation vendor. We're based in Switzerland, but have a U.S. headquarters here in the Bay Area in San Francisco. We've been around for quite a long time, over 25 years. We have over 450,000 users, and we're focused exclusively on digital process automation around the world, and from projects small to large. So would welcome the opportunity to speak with you about your digital process automation needs together with our premier partner in the US, InnoVelocity. So thanks, Neil. I'll hand it back over to you.
Great, yeah, thanks a lot, Tim. We love Axon Ivy too. I think it's a really strong technology in this digital process automation space. So a little bit about us, InnoVelocity. We're a specialist consultancy and system integrator that is 100% focused on these cutting edge digital transformation technologies like Axon Ivy in the digital process automation space, or UiPath and RPA, analytics and reporting, Tableau. The bottom line is that we offer a full suite of services that help our customers to deliver a complete solution, everything from process modeling and analysis through to improvement, automation, and that reporting. We're working with a variety of companies of all different sizes and different verticals. And oftentimes we're consulted not just to provide the technology expertise, but also to help them pull their program together. So along those lines, let's get into our topic today. And we'll start with a quick introduction of some key concepts that we're going to be using throughout. A few new acronyms maybe for some folks. DPA, which is Digital Process Automation, PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act, and KPI, the key performance indicators, as well as the framework that pulls it all together. Now, again, like I mentioned before, we had a separate webinar, short 30-minute recording you can watch, which gives a great overview in a little bit more detail of digital process automation, or DPA. But just a quick recap here. DPA is, I like to think of it as the digital backbone for your business operations, where everything's centered around a business process map or business process model that you build on top of. And for the most part, the main thing that people purchase this kind of software for is to enhance the flow of work and the tracking of work in their organization. So standardizing a business process and best practices, putting them on rails, ensuring that the work is moving, automating work steps, providing rules, and so on. But there's much more to this software than just that. There's also this aspect of coordination where you can control multiple different systems that might be stuck in different silos today and don't talk to one another, with API orchestration, basically moving data from one place to another, with the DPA product being a common front end or user interface that coordinates all of that. There's also analytics, the fact that all of these products provide automated audit trail of every action and decision that's being made in the software with really fine-grained measurement to help you manage your workload and identify bottlenecks and other KPI, as we're going to be talking about here in today's session. And in terms of how you approach these projects or the key elements of the product, it also tends to be the same for almost all of them. There's a concept of a continuous improvement cycle where an analyst is designing some business process maps or models, swim lane diagrams that indicate what the steps are and the sequencing of the process and who the participants are, and coming up with an optimized 2B process that implements according to your business objectives. There's also usually some kind of designer type of product which can take that process map that's been modeled and allow you to build an application quickly on top of it to be able to design interactive forms, for example, for each one of the steps where you can collect information, validate it, and apply business rules. And then there's usually an engine where you can deploy those applications that you've built that provides a unified portal where people can pick up the work that's been assigned to them through a task list. They can kick off different reports and analytics, start new requests, and so on. And based upon information that you're getting out of your metrics, the idea is that you're supposed to feed that back in to making enhancements or adjustments to your process, and you can repeat the cycle again. And this improvement cycle is a really important concept if you're aiming to transform a business. These DPA products give you all this agility through rapid development and deployment so that your technology can keep up with changes in your strategy. But the actual concept of continuous improvement isn't a new concept in of itself. Back in the 1950s, Deming introduced the PDCA, or Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle, that you can see here, which basically says that you start off by understanding the requirements and expectations. You achieve alignment across the different resources that are required to execute. You assess whether or not you did what you intended to do, checking systems and process performance. And then you have some kind of feedback loop to drive continuous improvement and improve performance, which feeds back into your plans to repeat the cycle. And you're going to keep on doing this, heading towards your optimal end state. The result is that you want to have a sustained continuous improvement cycle. So how do you set the goals for this continuous improvement and measure whether you're actually improving? The way that you do this, of course, is I'm sure all of you have guessed, is through KPIs, or key performance indicators. These are those non-financial, quantifiable measurements that show you if you're on track and meeting your objectives. And they tend to be measured frequently, weekly, even daily, depending on the kind of access that you have to the data. And another key concept is that these KPIs typically are driven from your organization's strategic objectives or key result indicators. There's lots of different models for this that many of you may have seen. Some companies run a balanced scorecard for the strategic objectives and key results, and then develop KPIs off of that. There's also, management by objectives is another kind of common framework for doing the same kind of thing. But again, the principles are the same, regardless of what approach you follow. Now, when it comes to taking this digital process automation technology and implementing it with continuous improvement, the framework that we typically recommend incorporates the Plan, Do, Check, Act concepts within it, and it's highly KPI driven. You can see here, this is a little bit of an eye chart. I'm not going to read all of this out to you, but just a few key highlights out of it. You start with this foundation at the bottom here, which is your baseline. understanding the organization's strategic priorities, key processes, and the metrics and KPIs that you want to measure, along with identification of some process gaps that you want to resolve with DPA. That feeds into an intake or initiation process that selects what's the highest value, highest priority projects to work on using those KPIs to drive priority. And then as you're going through and analyzing and defining the process, you're using those KPIs to drive what the to-be state will look like. And when you're developing your application, you're making sure that the automated KPI capture is there with the necessary reports and data structures. And after you've rolled it out, there's some kind of process where you're observing the KPI, capturing the gaps in the lessons learned, reporting back to leadership, and then updating the baseline as appropriate with any additional gaps or improvement opportunities. And from there, you could launch your next project. So just to make this a little bit more real, just taking an example from the life cycle, let's say you've launched a project from your baseline and you're doing some analysis and you suspect that rework is the main cause of some long throughput time. You know that you need to capture the number of reworks in order to monitor your performance against the baseline and for reports. So when you're going through the optimization process and you're designing this automation, you want to define steps that will capture rework and make sure your UI and your database structure is going to accommodate this concept of capturing rework, and you're building your UI and your database and your reports and your dashboards accordingly, so that when the process is running and in production, you can create something like a Pareto chart of the average throughput times of each step in the process, calculating the percentage of processes requiring rework, look at the top 3 Pareto items for improvement, and then feed that back into the baseline as the next opportunity for improvement of the process using root cause analysis to really identify the specific opportunities. So here you can see I've added some screenshots. Axon Ivy is a product that supports this through their process modeling, where you can map out the process model to capture those rework steps and design friendly responsive UIs where that information can be captured. And then it also has out of the box capabilities where you can roll up and present dashboards, including things like those Paretos. So all this is very well and good, but onto the heart of the matter is, how do you select the right process to work on in the first place and the right KPI to drive it? Because oftentimes what we see when people are bringing this kind of technology in, the proof of concept project or the first project already has some pretty clear objectives and some measurements, and you execute that and everyone's happy. But the question is, where do you go from there? How do you select the next opportunities? How do you get the most value out of this investment that you've made in a platform that can automate many processes? And this is where the baseline comes in. And when we say baseline, really what we're talking about is defining the starting point for this continuous improvement journey. And I'll explain this with the example of a project that we recently worked on. There was a small biotechnology company that was going for ISO and MDSAP certification. That was one of their key strategic objectives for the organization. It was really critical to get their product out to market. And that's where we decided to start our baseline process, was to focus on production and QC processes against ISO and MDSAP requirements as a lens. So we went in and performed an audit where we performed interviews, document collection, capturing existing procedures and process documentation, working with the IT folks to understand what the current IT architecture is in terms of different platforms and standards and tools that are available. We walked through the processes and we're looking at them with ISO as a reference model, as a lens for coming up with specific metrics and identification of process gaps, modeling them all, and also identifying the maturity of the process and its suitability for automation. And at the end of all this, we generated a report indicating what gaps needed closing and which of those gaps could be solved with automation, along with some of those measurables. And when it comes to the measurables for automation using something like DPA, what we found is that no matter what specific metric or KPI you come up with, they generally fall into one of these four categories. The first one being audit and compliance gain, where you're providing an audit trail that is required by an auditor. You're standardizing your procedures so that everyone is following the process in the same way, and that's defensible and demonstrable. And of course, closure of specific known audit issues or findings can be done by putting your process on rails and baking these new processes and procedures in using DPA. There's also customer satisfaction gains, which is a broad umbrella for many other kinds of KPI. And this is realized when you're making improvements in your process that are consistent to customer expectations, better aligning it or exceeding those expectations, including closure of known customer issues. If there are customer surveys that you have, for example, Net Promoter Score, and you're gathering feedback, that's typically something that can be selected as a KPI. There's also productivity gains and throughput time gains. These are the most common ones that people think of when they think of automation. Productivity being gains that are realized when there's automation, removal of work steps, reduction of error and rework because of validations and so on. And throughput time when you're increasing the speed of execution by allowing a bunch of work that had to be done in sequence before to be done in parallel, or to automate or remove steps completely. Those kind of metrics also are extremely common and used quite frequently. So once you've identified those opportunities, the next step is to put them through an intake process. And I've shown you an example here on the screen of an intake form that we typically recommend, where there's a requirement to input the goals for the project or process that you're about to initiate in terms of those standardized KPIs. And there's also a ranking that we recommend using a range to identify the relative impact of the project against those KPIs and the strategic objectives of the organization. You'll also see, just as an aside, there's a slot down here at the bottom where you can put in all the other different documentation that you collected during your baselining audit, such as the existing manuals and procedures, existing IT and process models, existing questions, and so forth, basically packaging everything up to initiate the project. And then there would be a prioritization type of session where on a regular basis, for example, monthly, sometimes it's done quarterly, looking at all different opportunities that have been collected and identifying what are the one or two candidates that you want to proceed to the next phase in the life cycle that we talked about, the initiation phase. And this is where the KPI and the audit baselining information really comes into its own, because you're going to have a strong indication of value based on those KPIs and the relative scores that you put in. But you're also going to be able to assign a numerical maturity rank to the process as well. And by maturity, I mean how well defined, structured, and repeatable is the process? Is it a good candidate for automation with DPA types of technologies? And when you're doing that and you put it into a tool like this, we have a simple Excel example here. There are other tools that do this through a web application. You can start to plot out what are the ones which are the most mature and the highest value, and those would be the first targets that you would select to work on. And then maybe next you would start to hit the ones that have higher business value, but maybe a lower maturity, and you would really be leaving to last, or longest waiting in your queue, anything which has a relatively low maturity and a relatively low business value, basically helping you to pick the best and most impactful low-hanging fruit. And the prioritization or ranking of these projects would typically happen either internally within your own PMO, if that's how you're structured, or through a concept of a customer review board, where you might have representatives from the different key functions in your business who are senior enough to make a decision on what the priority should be, either through a consensus method or through a majority rules type of method. There are lots of different ways that you can implement that. The last piece that I'll add here is that through the intake process, you're also capturing the desired start and end dates of the project so that you can get some guidance on which opportunities you need to grab first. So the bottom line message here from this presentation really is that establishing these KPIs up front is critical for a successful DPA implementation and to have this concept of continuous improvement. And if you have a baselining exercise with an intake process, it can make sure that you're defining the KPIs correctly and selecting the right opportunities. So let's move on to the discussion now. Some examples of topics that we can discuss here are some KPIs for your projects in your industry, where you see things that fit well and where they don't, maybe difficulties in selecting or establishing KPI that you're seeing, software features that enable continuous improvement, or other topics. So I'll hand it over to Tim here. I think Tim's been collecting the comments that are coming in the chat here. Tim, do we have anything, any initial questions?
Yeah, we do. Thanks, Neil. A couple of questions coming in. The first question from Rajiv is, what kinds of tools do DPA platforms have to report on KPIs?
Okay, no, that's a good question. So I think there are different features that you have to consider when you're selecting your DPA platform. One of them is the ability to have automated data capture from within the processes that you're designing and executing. And what I mean by that is there's an ability for it to automatically track how long it's taking to complete each individual task, as well as the overall throughput time of the process. Many products now have built-in features where you don't have to do any special programming as such to capture that information. It's just captured automatically, and you can pull it and report on it. So if you have a tool that offers that, I think that's a strong capability, because it allows you to do all kinds of different analysis and modeling that you might not even have thought of when you were initially designing your process. But you also have to make sure that it's not so restrictive that it doesn't meet your needs. The other key feature, of course, is whether or not it has built-in reporting and dashboarding capabilities. So different vendors have different philosophies about that. Some of them say, well, you're just buying our product for automating your workflow and doing systems integration or orchestration. But if you want to do reporting and dashboarding, you should go off and buy Tableau or Power BI or some other product. Other products have very nice dashboards built in, so you have this unified user experience. You log into your homepage and your dashboard can be right there up in front of you. I think those would be the key things to consider. There are also some other separate classes of software out there that we haven't mentioned that are good just for collecting and defining your process models and your KPIs up front before you begin to automate. A lot of people will use Visio for that. Nintex has a product called ProMap, which is kind of cool. Signavio has something which is, again, just for documenting your processes as well. So that might be another thing to consider.
Thanks, Neil. Second question, by the way, I should mention that I think Axon Ivy would definitely fall in the category of having dashboards for our customers, not steering you to buy something else. But that's a shameless plug for our own solution. But the second question's from Sue. We use Six Sigma, DMAIC. Will this process still apply?
Yeah, oh, definitely. I love hearing that question. I'm kind of a Six Sigma nerd as well. I'm not completely wedded to the methodology, as you can see, but I think a lot of the principles and tools from Six Sigma are fantastic. And the DMAIC that you mentioned, Tim, that's the define, measure, analyze, improve, control methodology of Six Sigma, which is really very similar to Plan, Do, Check, Act, or the the BPM model, improve, execute. It's basically the same underlying principles and steps. They're just grouped or named a little bit differently. So we've done a lot of projects where we kind of map in Six Sigma methodology and use DMAIC instead of our own specific methodology or the Deming methodology, and it works just fine because, again, the principles are the same. They're universal.
Got it. I've learned that it's pronounced DMAIC, not DMAIC.
Right.
Something myself. Third question from Shunji. How do you determine if the KPI you selected is feasible and the right one?
Ooh, yeah, that I mean that's a good one because what we've talked about so far here is you're conducting your baselining exercise, and you're proposing KPI. You're taking measurements. You're even going through your intake process and you're ranking those, but you don't really know for sure until you enter the analysis phase, until you're really dissecting your process, you're starting to model it, and you're kind of tearing into the improvement objectives. So I think, you know, I hate to put in my advertisement, but our next session on, you know, kind of the next phase of the project, the analysis phase, is really going to help to answer that one because it talks about how you're using tools. Again, kind of back to the previous concept, some of the Six Sigma tools that we borrowed to help define that, um, and model it.
Well, that's it. I don't think we have any more questions, Neil.
Okay,
I'm just looking, so let me just check here. Nope, that's it for questions for the moment.
great. Okay, well, I think those were some good ones. So let's go ahead and wrap our session up here. Just a quick couple of contact notes here. So my name's Neil Simpson from InnoVelocity. My contact information's up here, Neil at InnoVelocity. We have Tim's email and Axe and Ivy's website up there as well. Highly encourage you check those out if you want to learn anything more about the DPA product, Axe and Ivy, which again, we love, or about us. Please also, if you're not already registered through the meetup.com, the Bay Area Digital Transformation Group, please do sign up for our future sessions. There are a couple more throughout the rest of this year, which are, I think, going to be very interesting. And again, I'd like to thank you all for your time and for joining us here on this virtual webinar. And hopefully soon we'll be able to return to doing these in person.
I look forward to that as well. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you. Bye.
Everyone, bye now.